Link TV presents Mosaic World News from the Middle East. Here are today's top stories.
Renewed clashes over oil-rich regions spark war fears between the two Sudans. Saudi security forces beat female students protesting outdated education system. And Syria vows to implement ceasefire plan. Mosaic. World news from the Middle East begins now.
The Vice President of Sudan said his country is now in a state of war with South Sudan and will not negotiate with the latter. Khartoum vowed to respond with all legitimate methods to the attack launched by South Sudanese forces on the Heglig region.
An Agence France press correspondent said Sudan's Air Force launched strikes near the village of al-Tashween as its army shelled the area with artilleries. Artillery fire was heard from both sides.
The oil-rich region of Heglig in the state of South Kordofan has completely fallen to the South Sudanese Republic's People's Army. Government sources said the army used heavy weaponry and artillery in its attack on the region, with the participation of a large number of forces. Meanwhile, the Sudanese army issued a statement indicating that battles between the two sides are continuing in the region. The statement accused South Sudan of being involved in what it described as a brutal assault. It also accused South Sudanese President Salva Kiir of what it referred to as a desire to prolong the war between the two neighboring states. The statement said the South Sudanese government's People's Army was mobilized from inside the newly born country with the assistance of what it referred to as mercenaries. Observers described these on-the-ground developments as the start of a comprehensive war between the two neighboring states, the signs of which have started to loom. If war continues, it will weaken the resources of both countries.
The South seceded, then war broke out once again. This means the past 6 years have been a mere period of truce, and now war is erupting again. This will cause resources to be wasted, the political process to be obstructed, the economy of both states to be destroyed, and it will weaken both of them. For this reason, and in this very late phase, we are still hoping the two sides will be able to overcome their differences and reach a comprehensive, peaceful solution.
The oil-rich Heglig region in the state of South Kordofan is located about 70 kilometers north of the border between the two countries. It holds nearly 60% of the gross production of Sudanese oil and produces 115,000 barrels daily. There are also oil wells in the region and administrative housing that is allocated to the workers. The southern edge of Heglig was attacked in March by the forces of the People's Movement with the help of the Revolutionary Front, which joined the northern branch of the People's Movement and a number of Darfur's armed movements. However, the Sudanese army fended off the attack after hours of fighting. Before the secession, the North and South were engaged in a civil war. Now it is a war between two countries. The situation could have catastrophic results if it is not quickly remedied with wise policy. Osama Sin Ahmed, Al Jazeera, Al Khartoum.
Saudi female students were injured after security forces dispersed their sit-in. They were protesting their mistreatment at Tabuk University. Demonstrators were also severely beaten after forces dispersed the sit-in, demanding an improvement to their living conditions. In Asir, female teachers protested against being prevented from driving, while female prisoners continued their hunger strike for the 17th consecutive day.
These are the cries of Saudi female students being subjected to harsh beatings by security forces attempting to disperse their sit-in. They were demonstrating against the mistreatment of faculty at Tabuk University. The preparatory year female students were holding a sit-in to demand the sacking of foreign supervisors for mistreating them and an end to favoritism and discrimination. Regime forces stormed the protest and beat the demonstrators, wounding many of them and severely injuring some. In Tabuk, several demonstrators were also subjected to harsh beatings by security forces, dispersing a protest in front of the province's government headquarters. Demonstrators were demanding an improvement to their living conditions and an end to power and water cuts. They chanted for the downfall of the ruling family, accusing the Al Saud princes of exploiting their country's natural resources for personal gains. Meanwhile, a number of Saudi female prisoners continue their open-ended hunger strike for the 17th consecutive day in response to the injustice and torture they are subjected to. The hunger strikers are in the prisons of Al-Hafar al-Qadim and Al-Jadid, Al-Zahban, Al-Qasim, Al-Shiar, and Al-Sharqiyya. In a statement entitled An Appeal and Invitation to the Campaign for the Victory of the Free Women, they called on other prisoners to join their strike until they are released. The statement indicated that among the 6 prisoners, 2 are pregnant and are being tortured. The statement condemned the silence of the Arab world and the international community, appealing for a quick mobilization to rescue them. It also demanded the United Nations and human rights organizations pressure the regime for their release. In the Asir region, dozens of female teachers gathered in front of the Department of Education building to condemn being prevented from driving. The Saudi Al-Hayat newspaper reported that the teachers originate from different provinces, notably from Bahra, Tehran, and Al-Namas. They demanded their transfer to their places of residence like their colleagues and asked for their rights and transportation privileges. They also condemned the Department of Education's policies, asking for an end to injustice. Meanwhile, Princess Basma bint Saud bin Abdulaziz demanded a constitution that treats men and women on equal footing.
Saudi women and women in general in the Arab world face pressure, unseen even during the period of ignorance. We have become a fearful society.
Saudi authorities imposed a 10-year travel ban on rights activist Sheikh Muklif al-Shamari. The Interior Ministry imposed the ban because of al-Shamari's human rights work.
نبدأ من دمشق حيث قالت وزارة الدفاع السورية أنها ستوقف كافة العمليات العسكرية اعتبارا من صباح.
The Syrian Defense Ministry said it will cease all military operations on Thursday morning, adding that its armed forces have completed their mission in combating the criminal acts of armed groups and enforcing the rule of law over its territory.
لكنها أضافت أن تلك القوات ستبقى متأهبة للرد.
However, a Syrian source said armed forces would remain on alert to counter any attack launched by the armed terrorist groups. On the ground, the Syrian Revolution's General Commission said the death toll rose to 31 due to heavy rocket and artillery shelling in Homs, where tanks and armored vehicles are deployed. Incoming reports confirm that several villages in Latakia's Jabal al-Akrad, Idlib, and Daraa have been stormed.
This is Homs, hours before the second deadline is due to expire. This is the scene in the neighborhood of Jurat al-Shaya amid heavy rocket and artillery shelling.
حال مشابهة كانت في الخالدية والقرابيس.
The scene was not much different than the one in Khalidiyya and al-Karabis, where shelling has not stopped for weeks. Most residents in the old city of Homs have fled, leaving behind destroyed homes filled with the smell of blood and gunpowder, amid hope they will return once the shelling stops, as announced in the news. Thursday at 6 in the morning is the deadline set by Kofi Annan's initiative for the regime to halt its shelling and withdraw its tanks from the cities, and for the opposition to hold its fire. However, reports indicate operations by the regime's forces continued in the same manner. Storming and shelling in Al-Qusayr near Homs, Zabadani near Damascus, Hilfaya near Hama, Al-Quriya near Dir Az-Zur, Maraba and Busra al-Sham in Daraa, where warplanes were deployed. The regime's forces carried out a campaign of raids and arrests in the villages of Tzil and Ankhel. In addition, the Syrian army's artillery bombarded a number of villages in Jabal al-Akrad in Latakia, where houses were demolished while their occupants were inside. Villages in Jisr al-Shugur were stormed, and towns in Wadi Barada of Damascus were shelled, inflicting casualties among the residents.
يرى المعارضون أن هذه دلائل.
Dissidents believe these acts indicate the regime will not comply with Thursday's deadline, and it has already violated Tuesday's deadline. On the other hand, the Syrian authorities believe they have no choice under the given circumstances but to continue pursuing armed groups, which are committing killings and acts of destruction in the city. Despite the deteriorating situation, under which dozens of Syrians are being killed every day, Kofi Annan expressed optimism following his meeting with the Iranian foreign minister.
If everyone respects
it, I think by 6 o'clock on Thursday, we should see an improved situation on the ground. It is possible to make progress. It should be in the interest of the Syrian people, from both sides, to commit to a ceasefire by 6 a.m. on Thursday.
Part of Annan's speech may have something to do with what he heard from Iran, Damascus's closest ally, which expressed support for Annan's plan. Annan hopes that Iran will mount pressure on its ally. However, what concerns the Iranians the most in the Annan initiative is the fate of the Syrian president.
We are pleased to see there's no talk of forcing the Syrian leader to step down, or talk of regime change in Annan's plan, and that his proposal encourages the parties to negotiate and allows more time for change to take place.
أما العالم المترقب سير الأمور والوقت في سوريا.
Meanwhile, the world, anxiously monitoring the situation and time frame in Syria, is preparing to take other measures in case the regime fails to execute this plan. And this is when the world would face the moment of truth, according to Washington. However, observers believe that any measure will not go beyond imposing additional sanctions through the UN Security Council, pending Russia's approval. Wa'el Tamimi, BBC.
Under the pretext of uncovering the media's deception, Syrian TV channel Al-Dunya, which is loyal to the Syrian regime, attempted to fabricate a new scenario of the incident the new TV crew was subjected to. But with facts and the actual events, we unveil their media conspiracy. My colleague Rochelle Karam reports.
Al-Dunya TV continues to monitor the work of those hired satellite TV channels that have no journalistic ethics and further exposes their involvement in the Zionist project targeting our nation.
With resolute confidence, the news anchor of the Syrian regime's loyalist TV channel Al-Dunya describes New TV as possessing no journalistic ethics, exposing what she calls our involvement in the Zionist project. At the moment, we have no interest in discussing politics and engaging in pointless controversy, despite New TV's history of resisting and fighting the Israeli enemy and supporting the resistance. This history is a witness to our past and our future. However, since the news anchor of Al-Dunya is eager to defend our professional ethics, we must remind her and Al-Dunya TV that media deception is something that New TV refuses to be accused of, and we will not allow it, especially since a New TV staff member was martyred in our quest to rise above injustice and the media's lies. 2 days ago, Syrian TV Al-Dunya astonished us with a report on the circumstances of the events along the northern Lebanese-Syrian border in an attempt to fabricate a different scenario by manipulating an account of the event by our colleague Hossein al-Khawaja. We now show the Syrian version.
I cannot determine the party because in fact it is unclear who is in control of that area. Even when the army's intelligence arrived, we did not dare talk to them and we did not tell them our location. We were afraid because we did not know which side they're on. We cannot determine that. Because right before, we had greeted the Syrian committees.
The words of my colleague Al-Khawaja after the tragedy were obviously edited. And besides, Al-Dunya seems to have forgotten that this answer was a response to New TV anchor Catherine Hanna's question on where they were hiding from the gunfire, and not who opened fire on the New TV crew. The following statement was edited.
We were also scared because we didn't know which side they belonged to. This is why we didn't tell them. But of course, the gunfire originated from the Syrian side. Yes, from the Syrian side, yes. Well, let's say the mixed side. I cannot confirm for sure because right before we had greeted the Syrian committees. I don't know, but of course the gunfire originated from the Syrian side.
Well, if their correspondent who was on site said otherwise, then what was the source that New TV relied on to draw its conclusion that the Syrian army was the party that opened fire?
Maybe the Syrian Dunya TV did not want to listen to more than a few seconds of her news coverage that lasted hours. However, because we believe it's important to help a TV channel that has lost its professionalism and reveal the full picture, we will rebroadcast clips of the account of our colleague Khres that was ignored by Syrian TV.
We started receiving warnings from civilians carrying weapons on the other side.
From the intelligence services.
Yes, I am sure the Syrian army is in control there. I also know that my colleagues and I were subjected to heavy gunfire that lasted 2 hours from the Syrian side by Syrian gunfire. It came from an area controlled by the Syrian regime's army that is deployed in that area.
In any case, may God have mercy on Ali Suleiman's soul, regardless of the reason of his presence there. May God have mercy on Ali Suleiman's soul.
To remind them, and so the misinformation is corrected, his name was Ali Sha'ban, not Ali Sulaiman. Rasha Al-Karam, New TV.
Is preparing for possible disturbances at Ben Gurion Airport this Sunday as hundreds of pro-Palestinian activists are planning to fly in to take part in those protests. Joining me now with the details and more is IBA's Ellie Walkelander. Good evening, Ellie.
Good evening, Yochanan. Yes, more than some 1,500 activists from 15 countries are due in Israel next week to take part in pro-Palestinian activities. The organizers, named the Welcome to Palestine campaign, tried to organize a similar action in July. Several hundred activists were prevented by airlines from boarding planes to fly to Israel or were denied entry into the country at Ben Gurion. There were no flight disruptions then, and police do not anticipate any disruptions now either. Public Security Minister Yitzhak Aharonovich called the protesters provocateurs, intent on disturbing public order, and that if they arrive in Israel, they will be identified, removed from the plane, their entry into Israel will be prevented, and they will be moved to a detention facility until they are flown out of Israel. Some 650 police officers, mostly in plain clothes and unarmed, are expected to be deployed across Israel's main terminal at Ben Gurion Airport to meet the activists from Europe and North America. Terminal 1 at Ben Gurion will be declared a sterile zone where passengers identified as part of the flotilla will be diverted. Security officials believe some 500 to 1,000 activists will try to enter Israel en route to the Palestinian Authority. The organizers say most of the protesters are expected to arrive from Central Europe, adding that other activists will be arriving from New Zealand, Australia, Turkey, and the U.S. Ahead of the flights, Israel is tracking activists on social media sites, compiling a blacklist of more than 300 names, and again asking airlines to keep those on the list off flights to Israel.
Joining me now in the studio here in Jerusalem to discuss the latest developments in the region is Dr. Gurion Baskin, founder of the Israel-Palestine Center for Research and Information. Dr. Baskin, thanks for coming in.
My pleasure.
Well, the very high-level meeting taking place at this hour between the International Quartet members. Any chance they're going to be more successful this time than they have in recent times in getting this peace process back on track?
There's no reason to believe that they will be. There's no real motivation from the part of the local parties to get back to the talks. There are conditions that have been set primarily by the Palestinian side that would enable talks to renew themselves, and the Israelis are not willing to give in to the preconditions that President Abbas has determined. I think that the quartet is mostly focusing on how to prevent disaster, how to mitigate any return to violence, to keep the status quo going for as long as possible until after the U.S. elections.
In Washington, the United States, the United Nations, the European Union, and Russia called on the international community to secure aid valued at $1.1 billion for the Palestinian people this year. The quartet's position came in response to the Palestinian leadership's call on the international community to adhere to its pledge to help the Palestinian Authority face the financial crisis it is suffering from.
The quartet held another meeting in Washington with the aim aim of resuming the negotiations that have been stalled since September 2010, after the world failed to get Israel to commit to an end to settlement construction, or even a temporary freeze. The meeting comes several days after the American and Russian peace envoys visited the region. However, based on the Palestinians' previous experiences with the Netanyahu government, they have little hope an Israeli commitment will be attained.
Now is the time to break the pattern of this process. I mean, they called on the Palestinian and Israeli sides to resume the peace talks. We are not opposed to negotiations. Now is the time to break this deadlock. They have to push Israel to commit to its obligations, and there are three of them. First, stopping settlement construction, including in Jerusalem. Second, establishing the border on the pre-1967 boundaries. And third, releasing the detainees. These are not conditions, they are agreements and part of the terms of reference.
As Washington is preoccupied with its upcoming elections, Europe is drowning in economic crises, and the Arab world is burning with revolutions. Political observers predict the failure of any current political move. They confirm that today's actions are taken just for the sake of taking action.
At the moment, American and Western attention is focused on Iran and what is currently happening in Syria. In order to gain more attention and support for Western policies on the Iranian and Syrian issues, they are doing more for the issue of the Palestinian cause. The purpose of the action is more important than simply taking action.
And while waiting for the international community to reach a resolution that would push the leadership in Tel Aviv to end its aggression, it seems this diplomatic vacuum creates an opportunity for them to impose their realities on the ground and Judaize what remains of Palestine's land. The quartet has long adopted the soft diplomacy approach with Tel Aviv that seeks a daily escalation, while the quartet does nothing to confront the settlements on the ground. For this reason, observers believe such meetings are a waste of time. Mir Jumhur, Palestine TV.
Iran stops oil sales to Germany just one day after halting crude exports to Spain. Tehran says it's also likely to stop oil supplies to Italy. It has already stopped sales to France, Britain, and Greece in response to EU sanctions on its oil industry. Tehran has also banned imports from 100 European firms. Iran's decision to stop oil sales to the European countries has shot up global oil prices, as well as fuel prices in the U.S. and Britain to record highs. Iran is the world's fourth oil producer and OPEC's second largest exporter. One more Bahraini has become the victim of toxic gases thrown into residential areas by Saudi-backed regime forces. Abdul Rasul Hassan Ismail died after inhaling poisonous gas fired on his house in the village of Karbabad last week. Regime forces used heavy-handed tactics as people were out on the streets to demand the release of detainees. More than 80 people, half of them this year alone, have been killed in regime's crackdown. Thousands of people have been put behind bars since the revolution began in the island nation last year. In the meantime, Bahraini authorities continue to defy national and international calls to release prominent rights activist Abdul-Hadi al-Khawaja. He has been on a hunger strike for over 2 months and is feared to be on the verge of death.
It's been more than 2 months, and one of Bahrain's most prominent human rights activists is fighting for his life in his prison cell. Abdul-Hadi al-Khawaja has been on hunger strike since February 10th. He's protesting his life sentence issued for his role in anti-government protests. The issue has further damaged the monarchy's political and economic standing in the world. Human rights groups have urged Formula One teams to boycott the April 22nd race in Bahrain as Saudi-backed regime forces attack anti-regime protesters on a daily basis. The race was called off last year, and a second cancellation could cost the monarchy hundreds of millions of dollars. Now, former London Metropolitan Police official John Yates, who advises Bahrain's police force, insists that the race be held as scheduled, defying people's strong opposition. The tiny Persian Gulf kingdom has been in the grip of a revolution since February 2011. Peaceful demonstrators demand an end to the UK-founded al-Khalifa regime, which has been ruling Bahrain for the past 2 centuries. Scores of protesters have been killed, including some tortured to death. This as the US, UK, and major international rights organizations continue to ignore the plight of the people of Bahrain.
And staying with Bahrain, the regime's vigilantes have attacked people in several villages on the outskirts of the capital, Manama. Mobs with knives and iron rods also ransacked a supermarket which, according to the Associated Press, belonged to a Shia-owned business group. The hit-and-run attacks happened late on Tuesday. Assailants appeared to be linked to a wave of reprisal and intimidation against more than a year-old revolution in the country. There have been reports of several vigilante-style attacks in recent weeks in areas prone to anti-regime protests. The kingdom's largest opposition group, al-Wafaq, has accused security forces of failing to confront the pro-regime militias.
The views expressed on Mosaic are from contributing broadcasters, not Link TV or its sponsors. The production of Mosaic is made possible by grants from the John D. and Catherine T. MacArthur Foundation, the Wincoat Foundation, the Firedoll Foundation, and by support of viewers like you. Thank you. Watch Mosaic World News online. Stay up to date with breaking news, read our blog, get transcripts of past shows, and more at linktv.org/mosaic. Airwaves, a global channel of uncompromising stories, world news, documentaries, entertainment, and culture. Link TV, connecting you to the world. For more information, visit linktv.org.